Economy is that way, sweetheart. The man in seat 2B said it without even looking up from his boarding pass, his voice carrying the particular kind of confidence that has never once been challenged. Talia Mercer did not move. She was already seated in 2A, eyes half closed, a thin gray hoodie pulled over her shoulders, one hand resting loosely over a worn leather satchel looped around the armrest beside her. She had been in that seat for exactly 3 minutes before he arrived, and in those 3 minutes, she had been doing something she had not done in 61 hours. Nothing. Not reviewing term sheets, not fielding calls from lawyers who billed more per hour than most people earned in a week. Just breathing, letting the low hydraulic hum of the aircraft settle over her like a blanket. The man was tall, somewhere in his late 50s, silver hair combed back from a wide, sunburned face. His suit had once been expensive, the cut still saying something, even if the wrinkles said long day. His name was Roger Vance, Executive Vice President of Regional Sales for a logistics company headquartered in Dallas. He had flown first class on Meridian Airways 186 times, a number he knew precisely because he checked it the way other men checked their pulse. He looked at Talia, her plain hoodie, her hair pulled back in a simple bun, her unbranded, unbothered quiet. And he calculated something in under 3 seconds, the way people do when they've spent a lifetime making assumptions and never once been corrected. He had miscalculated by roughly $5.1 billion. My boarding pass says 2A, Talia said, her voice smooth and unhurried, the way deep water is smooth, calm on the surface, immovable underneath. She reached up and settled her headphones back over her ears. If you're having trouble finding your seat, the flight attendants are very helpful. Roger's face moved through several colors before landing on a deep, blotchy red. He shoved his briefcase into the overhead bin, and as he did, his elbow caught the strap of her carry-on and knocked it sideways with more force than gravity required. From row 3, a woman named Margaret Lowell looked up from a book she had not yet read a single page of. She noticed, with the careful attention of someone who has learned to watch the world closely, that the woman in 2A didn't react at all. Not with anger, not with a flinch. She simply kept her eyes forward, her hands still resting on the satchel, and waited. In the galley doorway, a young flight attendant named Eli Ramos watched the whole exchange. He had already seen the manifest. He knew something nobody else in the forward cabin knew yet. He opened his mouth, then closed it, then looked away. Roger Vance turned and marched toward the forward galley, certain he was about to fix a problem. He had no idea he was about to become one. 61 hours earlier, Talia Mercer had been sitting in a different kind of seat, a high-backed leather chair in a windowless boardroom on the 31st floor of a glass tower in Charlotte, North Carolina, surrounded by 8 lawyers, 2 investment bankers, chief financial officer who kept loosening and retightening his tie, and Walter Combs, the chief executive officer of Meridian Airways, who was doing something Talia had only seen twice in 18 years of finance. He was begging, not on his knees. Walter Combs was too proud for that, but the tremor in his hands when he slid the term sheet across the table, and the way his eyes tracked her pen like a man watching a lifeline being thrown into deep water, that was begging, dressed up in a tailored Navy suit. Meridian Airways was dying, and not quietly. The airline had been losing $9 million a day for 4 straight months, crushed by a disastrous fuel hedge its board had signed 18 months earlier, a grinding pilot labor dispute, and a fleet old enough that maintenance cost more than the flights themselves brought in. Without an immediate capital injection, Meridian would file for Chapter 11 within 48 hours. 31,000 jobs, gate agents, mechanics, cabin crew, the entire invisible architecture of a working airline, were 2 days from disappearing. Walter Combs had called 5 private equity firms before he called Talia. All five had looked at the numbers and quietly declined. Vantage Capital had not declined. Talia had spent 2 months studying Meridian's bones before Walter ever picked up the phone, because that was how she worked. Not reactively, but architecturally, the way you study a building before deciding whether to renovate it or tear it down. And she had seen something the other firms missed. The assets were real. The fleet, the gate positions at Hartsfield-Jackson and Logan and O'Hare, the maintenance hangars. All of it solid. All of it buried under a decade of leadership decisions so consistently bad they bordered on performance art. 6:52 that evening, Talia signed the term sheet. $5.1 billion, staged in escrow, wire scheduled for 9 the next morning. A controlling 53% stake in the airline. Walter Combs exhaled for what looked like the first time in weeks. And then, because she was who she was, Talia did something the room found either deeply principled or quietly strange, depending on who you asked. She booked herself on Meridian Flight 552 to Boston, a regular ticket. First class, because she wasn't going to perform poverty, but no VIP escort, no executives hovering, no warning to the crew about who she was. She wanted to feel the thing she'd just spent $5 billion to save. She dressed the way she dressed when she didn't want to be seen. A plain gray hoodie, black leggings, white sneakers, hair simple, no jewelry. To anyone who didn't know better, she looked like a tired professional catching an early flight home. Which was also exactly what she was. The satchel slung over her shoulder held 2 things: her travel documents and the original signed copy of the $5.1 billion term sheet. Not a scan, not a file on a laptop. Actual paper, actual ink, both signatures, which her general counsel had insisted she keep in her physical possession until the wire cleared. Before boarding, she sent her chief operating officer, Victor Hale, a single text. Boarded, Flight 552. Nothing else. Victor would know what it meant. She was wheels up, unreachable, finally resting. He'd hold things together until morning. She settled into 2A, looped the satchel strap around the armrest, the way she always did with anything irreplaceable, closed her eyes, and let herself exhale for the first time in 61 hours. 4 minutes later, Roger Vance arrived. Eli Ramos was 23 years old, 7 months into his first posting with Meridian Airways, and he was good at his job in the way quietly conscientious people often are: thorough, observant, slightly too aware of details others glossed over, and not yet confident enough to act on it when those details alarmed him. He was running the final passenger manifest in the forward galley when he found it tucked between 2 routine business class entries, like something filed there by someone who expected it to be noticed. Mercer, T-Seat 2A, and beneath the name, bordered in red, a classification he had never seen in 7 months of flying. Priority asset, do not disturb. Vantage Capital Protocol. Contact VH direct. Eli read it twice, then a third time slower, the way you read something hoping the words will rearrange themselves into something less serious. They didn't. He had no idea what Vantage Capital was. He flew planes. He didn't follow private equity. But the red border was unambiguous in any language, and do not disturb was about as clear as instructions got. He folded the manifest and started toward the galley curtain, already forming the sense he'd say to Carla Pruitt, the senior flight attendant, who was walking the opposite direction with a clipboard and an expression that suggested she'd already made up her mind about something. Carla, I need to show you something on the manifest. Not now, Eli. She didn't slow down. I've already reviewed it. Handle the pre-boarding check in back. There's a flag on 2A. A red classification I haven't seen before, and I think the word was a wall. She turned just enough to deliver it. I said not now. And then she was gone, pushing through the curtain toward first class, with Roger Vance drifting behind her like a man who already believed he'd won. Eli stood holding the manifest, He looked at the red border. He looked at the curtain swinging shut. He folded the paper carefully, slid it into his jacket pocket, and turned back toward economy. This was the moment the story was decided. Not by the powerful, not by the proud, but by a young man who saw the truth, held it in his hands, and put it away. The cabin had the particular rhythm of all late evening departures. Unhurried, half asleep. Business travelers arranging laptops and pillows with practiced economy. Roger Vance, back from his trip to the galley and waiting now for reinforcements, had colonized seat 2B with the territorial thoroughness of a man who believed that the amount of space you occupied was a direct measure of your standing in the world. His laptop was open, his phone was out, a folder of printed documents, actual paper, in an era when nobody prints anything, was spread across his tray table. His jacket was hung, his briefcase stowed, his water glass already half empty. He had effectively annexed the shared armrest and roughly 6 inches of Talia's personal space in a way that was technically deniable and absolutely deliberate. He glanced once at the leather satchel looped around her armrest, and something about it bothered him, without him being honest enough to examine why. It was expensive. He could see that much in the stitching, in the way it sat with the unbothered confidence of an object that had never needed to announce its value. It didn't fit the hoodie. It didn't fit his calculation of her. He dismissed the inconsistency the way he dismissed all inconsistencies that threatened his assumptions, quickly and completely. From row 3, Margaret Lowell watched Roger's elbow drift further into Talia's space. She watched Talia's hand stay exactly where it was, without tension. She watched the senior flight attendant emerge from the galley with a clipboard and a smile that had been assembled rather than felt. And she understood, with the resigned certainty of a woman who had seen this particular theater before, that the next 20 minutes were going to matter. She set her book down. She made sure her phone was charged. She positioned it face up on her knee, camera already open, and waited. The cabin door sealed with a soft, pressurized hiss, and the world outside disappeared. Carla Pruitt had been a senior flight attendant with Meridian Airways for 9 years, and in those 9 years she had developed a smile so perfectly calibrated it could communicate warmth, authority, sympathy, and finality all at once, without ever once reaching her eyes. She stopped at row 2 and deployed it. "Good evening," she said, her voice pitched at the exact frequency of professional concern. "I'm so sorry to interrupt. There seems to be a small discrepancy with the manifest, and I just need a moment to verify your seat assignment." She did not make eye contact with Talia. This was not an accident. Looking directly at the person you're about to displace makes it harder to displace them. Carla had learned this the way people who specialize in small injustices always learn their own techniques. "Is there a problem?" Talia asked, removing her headphones with the unhurried calm of someone who had decided not to be rushed. "We just need to confirm the booking," Carla said. "Occasionally there are system errors at check-in that require a quick review." Talia unlocked her phone, opened the Meridian app, and held the screen up without comment. The display was unambiguous. Mercer, T Flight 552, Seat 2A, First Class. Confirmed. Carla looked at the screen a beat too long, and something flickered behind her eyes, a recalculation quickly suppressed. "Thank you," she said, still not looking at Talia directly. Unfortunately, even with a confirmed booking, the system has flagged this seat due to an overbook in the forward cabin. "You've been selected for a complimentary relocation to economy, row 34, which is very comfortable and will." "Random," Talia said. Carla paused. "I'm sorry? You said I was randomly selected." Talia's voice was completely level, completely undramatic, and somehow the most dangerous sound in the cabin. Out of 14 passengers in this cabin, the algorithm randomly selected the only black woman who also happens to be sitting next to a man who walked to your galley to complain about her presence within 3 minutes of boarding. She held Carla's gaze for the first time. Is that the official position of Meridian Airways? The silence stretched. Roger leaned in from 2B, chest forward, the way men do when they've decided their presence is itself an argument. Listen, he said, with the exhausted patience of someone explaining something obvious to someone difficult. They made a mistake with the booking. Just grab your things and let the adults sort it out. From row 3, Margaret's phone, resting on her knee, was now recording. Carla recovered, looked at Roger with a brief, apologetic warmth she had not directed at Talia once, then turned back with a harder expression. Miss Mercer, I need you to gather your things. We have a schedule to maintain. Bring the captain, Talia said. Not angrily. Not bring the captain, the way you'd say show me the contract. Like it was its next move in a process she'd already mapped 3 steps ahead. Carla stood still for a moment, and then walked toward the cockpit, her footsteps precise and controlled. The smile finally, completely gone, replaced by something that looked, to anyone watching closely, a great deal like doubt. Eli stood at the galley, curtain. He had come back from economy. He had heard everything. He pressed the folded manifest deeper into his jacket pocket and stared at the middle distance and said absolutely nothing. Pay attention to that folded piece of paper in his pocket. It is going to matter more than anyone in that cabin understands tonight. Captain Frank Donnelly was 60 years old, gray and broad-shouldered, with 26 years of commanding aircraft behind him, and a relationship with his own authority that had calcified somewhere around year 14 into something no longer just confidence, but a kind of absolute. He came down the aisle without rushing, because men like Frank Donnelly do not rush, and stopped at row 2 with his hands clasped loosely behind his back, looking down at Talia with an expression that was less curious than already decided. What seems to be the issue here, he said, in the register of a man who expects the mere arrival of his voice to begin resolving things. The issue, Talia said, her posture completely relaxed, is that your purser is attempting to remove a confirmed first-class passenger from her paid seat in order to appease a man who is uncomfortable sitting next to a black woman. That's the issue, Captain. Something moved through Frank's expression. Not guilt, but impatience, with her framing, as if the accuracy of it were beside the point. I don't deal in accusations, he said, leaning slightly forward, using his height the way men do who've never once been told not to. I did in the operation of my aircraft. My flight attendant reported an uncooperative passenger, and on this plane, my word is the last one. You will move to the seat you've been assigned, or you will be removed from this aircraft entirely. That's your choice. Talia looked at him. She looked at Carla, 2 steps behind. She looked at Roger, settled back into 2B with the satisfied ease of a man watching someone else finish a job he had commissioned. She took 2 full seconds, not of hesitation, but of looking the way you look when you want someone to know you are seeing them clearly. Captain, she said, I'm going to say this once. If you proceed, you will not just lose your job. This airline will not exist by the end of the week. That is not a threat. That is a financial fact, and I recommend you treat it as one. Frank let out a short, hard laugh, the laugh of a man who genuinely finds the idea of being threatened by the person in front of him amusing. He turned to Carla. Call ground security, he said. I want her off my plane. Roger exhaled with the deep, satisfied sound of a man who'd gotten exactly what he wanted. He reached for his phone and opened the camera. Margaret Lowell, in row 3, had already been recording for 4 minutes. Eli Ramos pressed his back against the bulkhead, staring at nothing, and the manifest in his pocket felt heavier than it had any right to. The wait for security had that stretched quality of time passing in a room, where everyone knows what's coming and nobody says so out loud. The first-class cabin had gone almost entirely quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't peace, but 14 people paying very close attention while pretending not to. Tray tables were not being used. Eyes moved carefully, measuring. Talia sat exactly as she had been sitting. Her hands were in her lap. The satchel was still looped around her armrest, and her hand rested on it. That same unconscious, unhurried gesture you make towards something you've spent a long time earning. 3 officers boarded. The lead, a broad-shouldered man named Sergeant Dale Pruitt, no relation to Carla, had the contained posture of someone who handled aircraft disruptions regularly and expected this one to be routine. He stopped beside Talia's pod and said, "Ma'am, the captain has requested you leave the aircraft." She responded clearly, in a voice calibrated to be audible to the phones around her without sounding like a performance. "I am a ticketed first-class passenger. I have committed no disruption. I am not a security threat. I am being asked to leave because I refused a discriminatory downgrade. I want that on record, ma'am," the officer said with the practiced patience of his profession. "We can do this calmly, or we can do this with difficulty. But you are leaving this aircraft. Please stand and gather your belongings." There was a long, full beat. Not of defiance, not of fear, but something quieter and more final than either, like a decision arriving after a calculation that had been running in the background of her mind since the moment Roger Vance first opened his mouth. "I want it on record," she said again, softly, almost to herself, "that I was given no choice." Then they reached for her. The hands were not gentle, one on her shoulder, one on her arm, gripping with the reflexive firmness of men executing a task. The satchel strap still looped around the armrest, pulled taut for one terrible second. Taut enough that her eyes went to it just briefly. And then the strap slipped and the satchel dropped, and the sound it made hitting the carpeted aisle felt, in the silence of the cabin, far louder than it was. A flight attendant she didn't know bent and pressed it into her free hand without a word as they pulled her past the galley. It was the single unrequested act of kindness in the entire proceeding. She did not resist. This was a choice, and not a passive one, the most deliberately calculated decision she had made in 61 hours, which was saying something. She understood, with the cold precision of someone who has navigated hostile rooms her entire career, that resistance would give them a word to use later. Combative, aggressive, threatening. She had no intention of handing anyone a word, so she made herself heavy, deliberate, and uncooperative in the one way they couldn't classify. She simply did not help them. "That's too rough," a woman in row 4 called out, her voice wavering but not retreating. "That's too much." The officer behind the sergeant held up a flat hand toward the cabin. He said nothing because there was nothing useful to say. Roger Vance kept filming, narrating under his breath, with the private, pleased murmur of a man who believes he is being proven correct. Margaret Lowell did not move a muscle. Her camera stayed steady, and it caught everything. His expression, his posture, the almost imperceptible satisfaction of a man watching an outcome he'd ordered arrive exactly on schedule. They released her at the jet bridge entrance. She stumbled, caught herself against the corrugated metal wall, and the sound of the aircraft door sealing behind her was the loneliest sound she had heard in a very long time. The jet bridge was fluorescent lit and slightly cold, and it smelled like recycled air and aluminum. Talia Mercer stood with her back against the wall and closed her eyes. Not because she needed to collect herself, she was already collected, in the way people forged by 18 years of being underestimated tend to be, but because she had learned somewhere in those 18 years that the body deserves 4 seconds of truth before the mind takes over completely. So she gave herself 4 seconds. Her shoulder ached, a deep wrenching throb that would need a doctor within 12 hours. The satchel was pressed against her chest, and through the leather she could feel the solid rectangular weight of the term sheet still inside it. The actual paper, the actual ink, $5.1 billion of signatures, still there, intact, which meant every option she was about to exercise was still available to her. She opened her eyes. She did not look back at the sealed door. There was nothing back there she needed anymore. She took out her phone, scrolled past 3 missed calls from Walter Combs's office she hadn't seen until now, and pressed the contact labeled V. H. Victor Hale answered on the second ring, alert. The way a man answers when he's worked for someone long enough to know a call outside normal hours is never nothing. Talia. He had gotten her boarded text. I thought you were in the air. Open the Meridian file, she said. Her voice was flat, even, completely without the warmth Victor was used to hearing from her, and that was how he knew, before she said another word, that something serious had happened. Opening it now, he said. Funds are staged. Escrow's locked. Wires set for 9. Everything's ready on our end. Pull the entire tranche, she said. A beat of silence. Pull what exactly? All of it. Drain the escrow. Cancel the wire. Terminate the acquisition under the Material Adverse Change Clause and dissolve every binding instrument we signed tonight. She was watching the security officer, 20 feet away, at the end of the jet bridge, speaking into his radio, glancing back at her with the slightly confused expression of a man waiting for his next instruction. I want Meridian fully and formally cut off from Vantage as of this phone call, she said. Get legal on it immediately. There were 4 full seconds of silence on Victor's end, the kind that isn't empty, but is a very intelligent person processing something significant at speed. Talia, he said carefully. If we pull funding right now, Meridian breaches their debt covenants by morning. They won't make payroll Friday. Walter will have to file Chapter 11 immediately. Do you understand what that means? I understand exactly what it means, she said. Someone at the direction of a Meridian captain and senior purser just physically dragged me out of a seat I purchased on a flight I took specifically because I had just agreed to save the airline that owned it. I was given a choice between the back of the plane or being removed. They removed me. A pause. Pull it. All of it. Tonight. Victor didn't ask another question. I'll have it done in 15 minutes, he said, his voice shifting into the gear it went into when he was already moving, already dismantling. Are you injured? My shoulder will need looking at. It's not urgent. Get the jet prepped at Concord. I need to be in Boston tonight, under my own arrangements. Done, Victor said. Talia, I'm sorry this happened. Don't be, she said. They'll be sorry enough for everyone. At 35,000 feet over the eastern seaboard, Meridian Flight 552 was experiencing, by every measurable metric, a perfectly ordinary overnight. The cabin lights had dimmed. Most of economy was asleep or approximating it. In first class, breakfast service was taking shape in the forward galley, coffee drifting through the curtain. Carla Pruitt moved through the cabin with her usual precision, and she felt, if she was honest with herself, good. Not guilty good. The specific satisfaction of a difficult situation handled efficiently, a cabin returned to the controlled environment she'd spent 9 years cultivating. Frank Donnelly had praised her over the intercom after takeoff. She had replayed the compliment 3 times. Roger Vance had not slept. He'd spent 2 hours on the plane's expensive Wi-Fi refining his video, trimming the opening, adjusting the color, adding a title card in a clean sans serif font that red passenger thinks she owns first class, gets dragged off Meridian Flight. He tagged 3 news accounts and 2 aviation commentary pages. He uploaded it, then settled back into the wide pod he considered rightfully reclaimed, and checked his view count, 312. He checked again 90 minutes later. Still roughly the same number, distributed across people he broadly recognized from his own social circle. He set a reminder to check again after landing, and closed his eyes. Eli Ramos worked the economy galley with his head down, filling water cups, navigating the narrow aisle, the folded manifest still in his jacket pocket. He had not spoken more than 10 words since takeoff, and nobody had asked him to. He didn't yet understand why throwing the manifest away had felt like doing something worse than keeping it. At 35,000 feet, the plane's Wi-Fi icon blinked steadily green. Roger Vance's view counter read 347. Then, 20 minutes later, as the plane began its descent toward Boston airspace, it jumped, like a match touching something that had been waiting to burn. 3,000, then 12,000. Then the number was moving too fast to read, and Roger Vance was asleep and didn't see it yet. A junior analyst at a hedge fund in Midtown Manhattan found it first. 26 years old, running on her third coffee, monitoring a pre-market feed that had been carrying a quiet, confusing story about Meridian Airways since just before 4 that morning. Nobody could explain why Vantage Capital had pulled out hours before the wire, and the airline's communications team had gone completely silent, which in financial journalism is a specific kind of silence. That means the story is worse than you think. She was scrolling to see if anything had leaked when Roger's video surfaced in her feed, served up by an algorithm that had noticed its accelerating engagement. She paused on it, zoomed in on the woman in seat 2A, cross-referenced the face against the Vantage Capital story she'd been following for hours, and looked again. Her post took 12 seconds to write. It asked whether the woman being dragged off the Meridian flight was the same Talia Mercer, who had just blown up a $5.1 billion bailout that morning. The algorithm caught it within minutes. Finance accounts picked it up first, then aviation forums, then the broader internet, and the video split. Roger's upload, which still showed his own face, grinning in the reflection of the seatback screen, went one direction. Margaret Lowell's footage went another, and Margaret's was the one that truly detonated, because it was wide and steady and showed everything. The full aisle. Frank's pointing finger, Carla's crossed arms, Talia's stillness, the satchel hitting the carpet, the dragging, and Roger Vance in 2B, grinning, filming, narrating under his breath with the satisfied expression of a man who believed he had just won something. Nobody had to explain the story. The story explained itself. A financial news network ran it at 8:51 that morning. Vantage Capital CEO physically removed from Meridian Airways flight hours before pulling $5.1 billion acquisition. Airline faces immediate insolvency. Every major financial outlet picked it up within 30 minutes. Meridian's stock opened at 84 cents. The exchange halted trading on it 4 minutes after the bell, pending catastrophic news developments. The video passed 1 million views, then 4 million, then 11 million. Margaret Lowell's steady, unedited 16 minutes was shared by venture capitalists, senators, airline veterans, and ordinary people who had nothing to do with finance but recognized immediately and viscerally what they were watching. A woman who had done everything right, sitting exactly where she was supposed to be, being removed by a system that had simply decided, without investigation, that she didn't belong there. Somewhere over the Atlantic coastline, Roger Vance was still asleep. His video had passed 22 million views. His face was the second most shared image on the internet that morning, and the replies, which he had not read yet and would not read until the wheels touched down, were not, in any meaningful sense, favorable. Walter Combs did not go to the office that morning so much as he occupied it, sitting behind his desk in the executive suite of Meridian Airways Charlotte headquarters. Present physically and absent in every other sense a chief executive is supposed to be present during a crisis. He watched 4 screens at once, and what they showed him, across every channel and every alert, was that his airline was dying in real time, in front of everyone, and there was no version of a response that could fix it. The board was already in an emergency session he had not been invited to. His assistant told him this by sliding a note under his office door, which was how he knew the process of removing him had already begun. His assistant came in again at 9:42 and set a single printed page on the corner of his desk. A pre-populated Chapter 11 filing template, every field already completed, needing only one thing. Then she left, closing the door behind her, with a gentleness that was almost kind. Roger Vance came back to consciousness somewhere over the Massachusetts coastline. The way you wake on a morning landing, unsure briefly of where you are, then sure, then reaching automatically for the phone. He opened his notifications. The grin that crossed his face as he registered the view count, a number so large it required a second reading, lasted about 8 seconds. It began to dissolve on the 9th when he started reading the replies. They were not what he had expected. He had expected affirmation, a community of people who shared his understanding of what had happened on the plane. Instead, he found his full name, his employer, his LinkedIn profile, his city, his role at the company, and his home address all compiled and circulated with the specific, merciless thoroughness the internet reserves for someone it has decided deserves to be seen. 28 million views of his own face, his own grin, his own narration, on a video he had titled and uploaded and tagged himself. He scrolled for 30 seconds. His face had gone the color of old ash. He turned the phone wordlessly toward Carla Pruitt, who was passing his pod with an empty tray. She stopped. She read the headline on his screen. She read the view count. She looked at the photograph of Talia Mercer the article had run alongside the story. The same tailored suit, the same net worth figure in the caption, and she recognized the face of the woman she had escorted from seat 2A. The tray in her hand tilted. She caught it, set it down carefully, and walked toward the cockpit door with controlled, deliberate steps, and her face had no color left in it at all. Frank Donnelly was discussing something with his first officer when the cockpit door opened, without warning. A serious protocol violation. And his response was immediate. "Carla, what are you doing? We're on final approach." She crossed the cockpit in 3 steps and held her phone over the center console, screen up, without saying a word. He looked at it with the reflexive annoyance of a man interrupted mid-sentence, and then he saw what was on the screen, and the annoyance left his face and did not come back. It was Margaret Lowell's video, playing from the beginning. The pointing finger, the dragging. He watched himself the way you watch something you're in, with the specific vertiginous shock of seeing your own actions from the outside for the first time, and discovering they look nothing like they felt from inside. The first officer leaned over, not watching the video, watching a market terminal on his tablet, which he'd opened while Frank watched the footage. His voice, when he spoke, was the calmest thing in the cockpit. "Captain, Meridian's been halted. There's a Chapter 11 filing. Had Vantage Capital pulled the $5.1 billion bailout this morning. They're saying it's directly linked to an incident on this flight." The woman in 2A, Carla said, her voice barely above a whisper, was Talia Mercer, CEO of Vantage Capital. She signed the term sheet last night. She was flying our plane. Frank Donnelly, 26-year veteran, held the controls with hands that were, for the first time in a long career, shaking. His pension, his certification, his entire reputation, all of it stacked neatly on the other side of a decision he had made in under a minute, based on the conviction that a woman in a gray hoodie did not look like someone who mattered. "She told you exactly what would happen," Carla said. Frank said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The wheels touched the runway with a deep, shuddering thud, and Roger Vance instinctively reached for his phone, the way frequent flyers do. Disable airplane mode. Let the world flood back in. The world reconnected with him immediately, and without any warmth whatsoever. His phone didn't so much receive notifications as seize beneath the weight of them. He opened his work email first, some part of him still defaulting to the place where things made sense. There was one message, sent at 4:21 that morning, marked urgent, from the CEO of his company. 3 sentences. Terminated for cause, effective immediately. Conduct on Meridian Flight 52, which he had publicly broadcast under his own name, constituted a direct violation of the company's code of conduct. Severance voided. Credential deactivated as of 3 a.m. His briefcase slid off his lap and hit the cabin floor. He did not bend to pick it up. Several passengers around him. People who had watched him film, who had heard him narrate under his breath, were looking at him now the way people look when they have seen something they will not forget. The intercom crackled. A stern, unfamiliar voice announced that airport police had boarded the aircraft and that all passengers were to remain seated. Officers came aboard with the efficient, unhurried authority of people fully briefed and expecting no resistance. A man in a Meridian high-visibility vest, Martin Castellano, the airline's director of East Coast operations, whose color had deserted him somewhere between the terminal and the jet bridge and had not come back, walked to the center of the cabin and did not lower his voice. Captain Frank Donnelly. Senior Flight Attendant Carla Pruitt. You are both suspended without pay, effective immediately, pending a full investigation. Please hand over your identification, your company credentials, and all company-issued devices. You will be escorted from the aircraft. Frank opened his mouth. Whatever he had planned, union representation, procedural objection, some final invocation of 26 years, it stopped before it became words. There were cameras, there was a police officer at his elbow. There was nothing left that would help. An officer moved down the aisle to row 2, looked at Roger Vance, still seated with his briefcase on the floor and the expression of a man at the bottom of a very deep pit, said his name, and told him he was being detained for questioning regarding his role in the incident. Brett stood. He walked down the aisle. The remaining passengers watched in silence, and the silence was the most complete verdict the cabin could have offered. Eli Ramos was the last crew member to leave the aircraft, not because he was detained. The suspension list hadn't included him. He was peripheral, a bystander, a junior attendant who'd been in the back. He walked off the plane and found a bench in the terminal, a plain metal bench in the in-between space where people move through rather than stay, and he sat down. He took the manifest out of his jacket pocket, unfolded it, and read the red bordered flag one more time, even though he already knew every word. He had seen this before the plane left the gate. He had held it in his hands. He had started to say something and been cut off and folded it away, and spent the next several hours carrying the weight of knowing something and choosing, in the moment that mattered, not to say it. He folded the manifest again carefully and took out his phone and dialed the airline's incident line, which he knew by memory because it was printed on the back of every employee badge. He filed a report detailing the flag, the conversation with Carla, and his own failure to escalate. He didn't frame it to protect himself. He stated it as it happened. Nobody had told him to do this. He did it because it was the right thing in the way right things feel when they arrive too late. Still necessary, still worth doing, still carrying the full weight of not having been done when it would have mattered. When he hung up, he looked at the departures board across the terminal. Dozens of Meridian flights listed in orange text, and one by one, beginning with the earliest departures, the status column began to change. Canceled, canceled, canceled. A private terminal outside Boston, in the gray quiet of a morning built for discretion, had no commercial gates, no departure boards, just tarmac and the low sound of a jet's engines cooling after a short hop south. Talia Mercer came down the stairs with. the careful deliberateness of someone managing a shoulder injury without visibly managing it. She was dressed differently now. A tailored navy suit, her hair precisely arranged. The hoodie was somewhere in her bag. It had served its purpose. She had worn it because she wanted to experience the product as an ordinary person. And she had experienced it fully, and the experience had been completely, devastatingly informative. Victor Hale was waiting with a tablet, and the expression he wore when the news was as bad as the numbers suggested, which meant it was very bad indeed. "Welcome to Boston," he said. "Numbers," she said, reaching the bottom of the stairs. He handed her the tablet. Stock halted at 61 cents. Walter Combs removed from the CEO position by emergency board vote at 6:20 this morning, not permitted back into the building. Chapter 11 confirmed at 6:08 Eastern. The fleet, the gates, the maintenance facilities. All of it now assets of a bankrupt estate, pending court proceedings. She scrolled through the figures as they walked toward the waiting cars. And she did not stop walking. And she did not pause to feel anything about the consequences of a decision she had made, because she had already felt what she needed to feel. 4 seconds of it, in a fluorescent jet bridge in Charlotte, with her back against a corrugated wall, and she had moved on. "What's left of the company?" she asked, before Victor had fully settled into the seat beside her. "Structurally, the physical assets are intact," he said, pulling up the inventory his team had been running for hours. 31 Boeing 787s, average fleet age 5.8 years. Gate positions at Hartsfield-Jackson, Logan, and O'Hare. Maintenance facilities in 3 states. The route certificates go with the bankrupt entity, but the bones, the actual infrastructure, that's still there. And it's worth real money. What isn't there anymore? The debt, which goes into the estate. The leadership, entirely gone, between the board removing Walter and the suspensions. And the brand. He glanced at her. "The brand is finished. Nobody is going to fly Meridian after this. The name is radioactive." "Good," Talia said. "We don't want the name. We want the bones." Victor looked at her. Something was assembling in his expression. The look of a very intelligent person arriving at a conclusion he hadn't quite let himself reach yet. "When a company files Chapter 11, he said slowly, the assets go to auction. At current market conditions, with the brand destroyed and the liability exposure, nobody on Wall Street is going to touch it. The headline alone makes it untouchable for any firm that cares about its optics," Talia said, "and every firm that could afford it cares about its optics." She looked out the window at the gray Boston morning, except us. We're already in the story. We're already associated with it. But we're on the right side of it, which means we can move in ways nobody else can. "We pulled the 5.1, Victor said. "It's liquid, sitting in our accounts. In a bankruptcy auction, this asset package clears somewhere between 1.8 and 2.3 billion. Maybe a little more if there's a competing bid. There won't be one. We go in at 2.1, she said. We buy the assets without the debt, without the legacy contracts, without the culture that made this airline what it was. We hire from the ground up. We write the conduct policy before we file a single route. And the airline," she said after a moment. "Beacon Air, Navy and Gold. The boarding policy, the training standards, the hiring criteria, all of it written by people who understand what dignity in aviation actually looks like, because we're going to make sure of it. We save the same jobs. We keep the same planes flying. We just do it without any of the people who decided those planes were for some passengers and not others." Victor looked at his tablet. He looked at her. "You saw the whole thing the moment they put their hands on you," he said. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. 6 months later, Beacon Air's inaugural flight from Charlotte to Boston departed on schedule at 9 in the morning, from the same gate, the same planes, repainted navy and gold, Every surface of the old infrastructure reassembled under a name that hadn't existed until Talia Mercer decided to build it. She sat in seat 1A, which was not a coincidence. A flight attendant brought her water without being asked, because that was the standard she had written herself. She opened her laptop and looked at the quarterly projections, and the number on the screen was larger than $5.1 billion, and she did not smile at it. She simply noted it with the focused attention of someone already thinking about the next thing, which is what builders do. In a Dallas suburb, Roger Vance sat across a desk from a man reviewing his resume. The conversation kept stalling at a particular moment, because the interviewer had a phone, and the phone had the internet, and the internet had a video with 31 million views, with a comment pinned at the top with over 400,000 likes, from an account that read M. Lowell. I was in row 3. I filmed the whole thing. She never raised her voice. Not once. Roger never worked in sales again. He took a job at a hardware store outside Plano, restocking shelves, and the first time a customer recognized him from the video, he walked to the back room and did not come out for 20 minutes. He told people, when he told them anything at all, that he had been treated unfairly, that it had all been blown out of proportion, that he was simply asking a question about a seat. He never once said the word sorry, not to a reporter, not to a former colleague, not to himself in the mirror at 4 in the morning, when the video played behind his eyes anyway. And that, more than the firing, more than the empty bank account, was the thing that kept him exactly where he was. A man cannot rebuild what he refuses to admit he broke. Frank Donnelly's pilot certification remained under review for 11 months. When it was finally reinstated, no major airline would touch his application. He spent his 61st birthday driving a regional shuttle bus between 2 small airports in Ohio, and when a passenger once asked him, almost as a joke, if he used to fly commercial, he said no and looked straight ahead and didn't elaborate. Carla Pruitt's case was different. She had cooperated fully with the federal investigation. She had named names, dates, 2 prior incidents buried in the same flawed manifest system that nobody above her had ever fixed. She was never reinstated as crew, but 18 months later she was working as an intake coordinator for a passenger rights advocacy group in Atlanta, answering calls from people whose flights had gone wrong in exactly the way hers once had. And she was, by every account from people who worked with her, very good at listening. Eli Ramos was offered a position with Beacon Air before the airline's first flight had even left the ground. He took it. 2 years later, he was running the very training program that had been built from his own incident report. The one junior crew member in the entire history of the old airline who had filed the truth without being asked. Even after it was too late to matter, he told new hires, every single class, that the manifest is not a piece of paper. It is a person. Read it like one. Talia Mercer's flight from Charlotte to Boston ran the final passenger manifest the same way every Beacon Air flight ran it. No red borders, no flagged classifications, just names and seat numbers. Every passenger exactly where they were supposed to be, in exactly the seat they had paid for, in a cabin built from its very first policy document on the principle that belonging is not a privilege you earn by being recognized. It is a right you hold the moment you walk through the door. If you watched this all the way to the end, you already know why it mattered. Not because of the $5.1 billion, not because of the videos, or the headlines, or the seat. Because somewhere in this story is a person who decided, in 3 seconds, that another human being didn't belong. And somewhere in this story is everyone who watched it happen and had to choose, right then, whether science was safer than the truth. Most of them chose silence. One of them didn't, and it changed everything. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment and tell me where you were watching from tonight.